The first sign was silence. Not the silence of empty space. That was expected. This was different. Every satellite, dish on Earth, every deep-range antenna from Siberia to Patagonia went quiet at the same moment. No static, no carrier wave, just nothing. Engineers stared at their screens. Someone in a monitoring station in Norway stood up from his chair without meaning to. Then the object appeared above the Pacific. It was not a ship in the way humans imagined ships. It had no clean lines, no obvious engine ports, no windows. It looked like something that had grown rather than been built. A dark, irregular mass the size of a small moon, hanging in low orbit with total stillness. No heat signature, no radiation. It simply existed above the planet, the way a stone exists at the bottom of a river. The Galactic Conclave's diplomatic station, orbiting between Earth and the Moon, lit up. Immediately, Ambassador Dorvan, a Sulhuri, tall and pale with 4 narrow eyes, pulled up the ship's registry the moment his sensors caught the silhouette. He did not need to zoom in. He recognized the shape the way a person recognizes a scar. Breath. He sat very still for a long moment. Then he turned to his communications officer and said quietly, "Give me a line to the council. Priority black." On Earth, the response was loud, fast, and thoroughly human. Within 40 minutes of the object's appearance, every major government had someone on a secure call. Radar feeds were shared. Fighter jets were scrambled, not because anyone thought they would help, but because standing still felt worse than moving. Admiral Reva Osman, head of Earth's Unified Defense Command, had been awake for 3 minutes when her aide put the first satellite image in front of her. She looked at it for exactly 4 seconds, then started giving orders. The Vreth did not attack. They sent a message. It came in on every frequency simultaneously: radio, microwave, the encrypted conclave band, even a tight beam optical pulse aimed directly at Dorvan's station. The conclave's translation system handled it in under a second. The message was short. The Vreth did not waste language. The translation read, "Biological pacification agent has been deployed into your upper atmosphere. Dispersal will be complete within 6 hours. Cognitive reduction will follow within 72 hours. We will return in 30 days to assess integration. Resistance is unnecessary. Your species will be comfortable." Dorvan read it twice. Then he opened the historical archive on his terminal and pulled up the Vreth deployment record. It was a long file. He scrolled through it slowly, the way a person reads a list of names after a disaster. 41 species, 41 worlds. The hollowing spore had been used on each of them. None had recovered. Most did not even fight back. By the time they understood what was happening, the ability to coordinate resistance had already dissolved. The Vreth did not conquer planets the way other civilizations did, with fleets and armies. They simply removed the part of a species that knew how to say no. He closed the file. He opened a message to the Conclave High Council and typed 3 sentences. The Vreth have deployed the spore on Earth. The human species will be hollowed within the standard window. I recommend we log this world as lost and update the sector charts. He hesitated before sending it. He looked out the small viewport beside his terminal at the blue curve of the planet below. He had been stationed near Earth for 2 years. Humans were loud and strange and deeply confusing in ways he still had not fully sorted out. They argued constantly. They laughed at things that were not funny. They formed opinions about food. He sent the message. On Earth, Dr. Soren Hadley was not sleeping either. He was the lead xenobiologist at the WHO's Emergency Xenopathogen Division, a department that, until 8 months ago, most people in the building had treated as a theoretical exercise. He had read every piece of Conclave's shared data on the Vreth spore. There was not much. Species that encountered it did not leave detailed scientific records behind. What he knew: the spore was airborne, self-replicating within a limited range, and targeted neural tissue through a protein folding mechanism unlike anything in human biology. It did not kill. It simply removed complexity from the brain, layer by layer, the way water removes paint from an old wall. The result was a living body with no particular interest in freedom, language, art, or the future. He had a team of 9 people. He put all of them to work the moment the Vreth message was translated. Outside, the sky looked completely normal. The sun set over the Pacific as it always did. People who did not follow the emergency broadcasts went to bed at ordinary times. A woman in Lahore looked up at the stars for a while before going inside. A boy in Sao Paulo fell asleep with a book on his chest. The spore was already there, invisible in the air they breathed. The Vreth vessel held its position and waited. It had done this 41 times before. It always worked. There was no reason to expect otherwise. Above the planet, Dorvin turned off the light in his office and stared at the ceiling. In the dark. 30 days, he thought. Less, probably. He wondered if he should have said something to the humans. Something kind. It was too late now, he decided. It was always too late once the spore was down. By the end of the second day, Soren had not slept and did not care. His team had been pulling atmospheric samples every 4 hours since the Vreth message came in. The spore was there. No question about that. Every filter they ran confirmed it. Under the electron microscope, it was almost beautiful, a tiny lattice of interlocking protein rings, each one designed with a precision that made his graduate school textbooks feel embarrassing. Soren had spent 15 years studying xenobiology. He had never seen engineering like this. But something was wrong with the numbers. The spore was entering human bodies. The inhalation rate was exactly what the Vreth models predicted. The early stage binding markers were present. But after that, the cascade simply stopped. The protein rings that were supposed to fold themselves into neural pathways were not reaching the brain. They were being broken apart somewhere, between the lungs and the bloodstream. Soren stared at his data for a long time. Then he looked at his colleague Dr. Amara Nkosi across the lab bench and said, "Pull up a full human gut microbiome panel. Every strain. All of them." Amara looked at him sideways. "You think the gut is involved?" "I think something is eating our invader," Soren said, "and I want to know what." It took 6 hours to confirm. The human intestinal biome, the dense, chaotic, frankly, excessive collection of bacterial species that humans carry in their digestive systems, was intercepting the spore at the metabolic level. Specific bacterial strains were treating the spore's protein rings as a food source. Not all of them. Not completely. But enough. The spore was being dismantled before it could do its job, partially digested, by organisms that had been quietly living inside human bodies for 10,000 years and had never been asked to save civilization before. Soren sat back in his chair. He rubbed his face with both hands. Then he laughed, a short, disbelieving sound that made everyone in the lab look up. "What?" said Amara. "We're being saved," he said, "by bacteria that also live in yogurt." The reports from the field hospitals began arriving that evening. They were not what anyone had prepared for. The hospitals had been set up to handle cognitive collapse, confusion, memory loss, loss of language. Volunteers had been trained. Beds had been arranged. Counselors were on standby. Instead, the calls coming in were confusing in a different way. A man in Karachi called the emergency line to report that his vision felt wider than usual, and that he had spent the afternoon noticing the color of things. He sounded cheerful. He wanted to know if that was a symptom. A woman in Cape Town reported that she had cried watching a documentary about birds and wanted to know if that was related to the alien situation. She also mentioned that bread smelled extraordinary. A group of university students in Manila submitted a collective report. Their handwriting was very enthusiastic. They described heightened pattern recognition, an unusual interest in textures, and a strong group consensus that fermented foods sounded deeply appealing. They enclosed a hand-drawn diagram of the spore they had sketched from the publicly released microscope images and noted that it looked, in their words, genuinely incredible from a design perspective. Soren read that last one twice. Then he filed it under a folder he labeled anomalous responses and kept going. Above Earth, the Vreth vessel's instruments were beginning to produce readings that made no sense. The sensor operator brought the data to Voice of Dominion 3 times before the commander agreed to look at it personally. The population metrics were wrong. Mobility rates should have dropped by 40% by now. Language complexity should be degrading. Social coordination should be showing early fracture patterns. Instead, every Metric was either unchanged or, impossibly, slightly elevated. Communication traffic was up. Infrastructure was running normally. There was an unusual spike in music production, which the sensor array flagged as statistically significant. Voice of Dominion studied the readings with the expression of someone trying to find a calculation error that kept not being there. Recalibrate the atmospheric sensors, he said. They recalibrated. The readings were the same. Run the deployment model again. They ran it. The model confirmed the spore had dispersed correctly. Concentration levels were within normal parameters. Exposure rates were total. Then explain the population data, said Voice of Dominion. No one could. On Earth's orbital station, Dorvin had been reading Soren's early field reports, which were being shared openly on Earth's scientific networks. Humans, apparently, did not consider it useful to keep their findings secret during a crisis. The reports were dense. With biology he did not fully understand, but the conclusion of the third one was simple, enough that it required no translation expertise. It read, preliminary finding, microbial shielding appears to be preventing neurological uptake of the spore agent. Human gut flora composition may represent an accidental but effective biological defense. Further study required. This is either the best news in the history of the species, or we are measuring something wrong. We do not think we are measuring something wrong. Dorvin read that paragraph 4 times. He opened a new message to the conclave and deleted it 3 times before he figured out what he wanted to say. He settled on, do not update the sector charts. Something unexpected is happening. He looked out the viewport again at the planet below, glowing blue and ordinary and completely alive. His previous certainty, the quiet, sad certainty that this was already over, had developed a crack in it. He was not sure how he felt about that. Relief, possibly. Something close to it. He had not felt that particular feeling in a very long time. On the 5th day, Voice of Dominion did something the Vreth Dominion had not done in over 200 years of expansion. He ordered a second deployment. The reserve canister, kept aboard every Vreth vessel for worlds with unusual atmospheric conditions, was released at a higher altitude with a wider dispersal pattern. It was not a decision made from panic. The Vreth did not panic. It was a decision made from process. If the first application produced anomalous results, the correct step was to repeat the application and observe. Science, even the science of subjugation, required methodology. The second spore cloud merged with the first over the course of 18 hours. The population of Earth reported stronger euphoria, a widespread and unrelated increase in people baking bread, and what news outlets were calling a national mood of unusual but pleasant disorientation. A composer in Vienna finished a symphony she had been stuck on for 3 years. A retired engineer in Osaka solved a fluid dynamics problem he had abandoned in 1987. A small fishing village in Norway collectively decided to repaint all their boats and could not fully explain why. Soren did not notice any of this personally because he had still not slept. He was writing. The paper had started as internal notes, just Soren and Amara logging their findings for the WHO database. But by day 4 it had become something more organized, and by day 5 Soren had to admit it was a real paper, a proper one, the kind he had not written this fast since his doctorate. He sent it to 3 colleagues for review. They responded within 2 hours. One of them added a full section on bacterial enzyme catalysis. Another corrected 2 of his protein labeling conventions and apologized for the abruptness. The third said, simply, Soren, publish this right now. He published it on day 6. He gave it a title that his department head told him was not sufficiently formal. He kept it anyway. The paper spread through Earth's scientific networks in hours. It spread outside them. Shortly after, the conclave monitored all open band transmissions from Earth as a matter of policy, and their translation systems flagged it automatically. Dorvin read it over breakfast and put down his drink. Then he forwarded it to the Conclave High Council with a subject line that read, in direct translation, please read this. All of it. Before you do anything else today. The Conclave Chamber, 17 light hours away, received it and convened an unscheduled session within the day. The paper was read aloud. a tradition the conclave maintained for significant documents. When the reader reached the section where Soren described the spore's protein folding mechanism as one of the most elegant pieces of biological engineering this researcher has encountered in 20 years of study, the chamber went very quiet. The Asari representative said, "They are complimenting it." The Dren representative said, "Yes. They are complimenting the weapon that was meant to destroy them." "Yes," said the Dren representative again. "That is what the document says." On day 7, the Vreth sent a scout drone to the surface. It was small, almost invisible, a standard reconnaissance unit no larger than a briefcase, designed to operate without detection. It dropped through the atmosphere over Central Asia and began its survey sweep, transmitting footage back to the command vessel in real time. Voice of Dominion watched the feed personally. The drone passed over a city, markets open, traffic moving, people walking in groups. It moved south and recorded a school, children in a yard, noise that the translation system classified as laughter. It swept east over a research facility where figures in hazmat suits were working outside, setting up collection equipment with the purposeful energy of people who had found something they very much wanted to study. One of the figures in the hazmat suits looked up as the drone passed overhead. It was unclear whether she saw it. She waved anyway. Voice of Dominion stopped the feed. He sat with his hands folded in front of him for a long time. "They know we are watching," said his sensor officer. "No," said Voice of Dominion slowly. "That is just how they are." He had reviewed the pre-deployment intelligence files on humanity. The files had been slim, a young species, early space contact, no significant military capacity, no history of interstellar conflict. The Conclave had rated them low priority. The Vreth had agreed. Nothing in the file had mentioned this. Whatever this was. On day 8, Admiral Osman called a meeting in a secure facility outside Geneva. Around the table were Soren, Amara, 2 military intelligence officers, a linguist, and a diplomat named Farid who had spent the last decade working conclave communications. Osman put a single sheet of paper in the center of the table. On it were 2 sentences. "The spore failed. We have 9 days before their stated return window." She let everyone read it. Then she said, "I am not interested in waiting for them to try something else. I am interested in talking to them before they decide to." Farid asked if the Vreth would accept contact. Osman said she had no idea. She also said she did not particularly care whether they were comfortable with it. Earth was going to reach out, and it was going to do so in the one language the Vreth could not dismiss, data. She turned to Soren. "How much do you have?" Soren slid a drive across the table. "Enough to make them very uncomfortable," he said, "and enough to make everyone else in the conclave very interested." Osman picked up the drive. She turned it over once in her hand. "Then let's get a meeting," she said. Above them, the Vreth ship sat in orbit and waited. It had been waiting for 8 days. It had never waited this long before. On every previous world, by day 8, there had been nothing left to wait for. The silence from the surface was not the silence of a species falling apart. Voice of Dominion did not know what kind of silence it was. That, more than anything, was what bothered him. The meeting request came through on the conclave diplomatic frequency, properly formatted, correctly signed, and addressed directly to the Vreth vessel by name. Voice of Dominion read it 3 times. He had received many communications from species. After a spore deployment, pleas mostly, occasionally threats from individuals who had not yet fully succumbed. Once, memorably, a piece of music with no accompanying text. He had never received a meeting request. Formal, polite, with a proposed agenda attached. The agenda was 1 line. Discussion of recent biological interaction and its implications. He accepted, partly from curiosity, partly because refusing felt, for reasons he could not name, like the wrong move. Dorvin prepared the orbital station's diplomatic chamber with the quiet dread of someone arranging chairs on a ship they suspected was sinking. He had briefed the conclave. He had been told to observe and report. He had also been told, very firmly, not to intervene. He had agreed to this with more confidence than he actually felt. The Vreth envoy arrived by shuttle, 2 soldiers and Voice of Dominion himself, which surprised Dorvin. The commander did not usually attend these things personally. Something about this had earned his direct attention. Osmond and Soren arrived from Earth on a separate shuttle 20 minutes later. Soren was carrying a battered bag that contained 3 data drives and a cold cup of coffee he had forgotten about. Osmond was carrying nothing. She did not appear to need anything. They sat across from the Vreth at the chamber table. Dorvin sat at the end, officially neutral, his 4 narrow eyes moving between the 2 sides in a way he hoped looked calm. Voice of Dominion spoke first. His translator rendered his words into flat, precise English. He explained what the spore was designed to do. He described its mechanism, its history, its deployment on 41 worlds. He said all of this without threat in his voice, the way a person describes a process that has always worked and simply needs to work again. He finished by saying, "We do not understand the anomaly. We are here to understand it." Osmond said, "Thank you. We appreciate the directness." She nodded at Soren. Soren set his bag down, pulled out one of the drives, and looked across the table at the most feared commander in Vreth military history. He said, "Before I answer your question, I have a few of my own. I want to know what substrate you use for the atmospheric bonding sequence, because our models suggest it degrades faster than standard silicate carriers. And I am wondering if that is intentional. I also want to know how long it took your biologists to develop the protein folding cascade, because the elegance of it suggests either decades of work or a very significant computational assist. And the targeting mechanism, is the species specificity designed in from the start, or is it a limitation of the first-generation model you have been working around?" A long silence. Dorvin had stopped moving entirely. Voice of Dominion said, very slowly, "You have analyzed the spore." "Yes," said Soren. "It's extraordinary. I mean that. I have been in xenobiology for 20 years, and the protein folding mechanism is unlike anything in our own biochemical literature. Whoever designed it was exceptional. I am genuinely curious whether they are still working in your research division, because I have follow-up questions." Another silence. Longer this time. Dorvin wrote one sentence on his private communication link to the Conclave Council. He wrote, "The human scientist is asking the Vreth commander for the contact details of the bioweapons designer. I have no further analysis to offer at this time." Voice of Dominion said, "You are not afraid." Osmond answered that one. "We were afraid on day 1, she said. "We have had 9 days. Since then, fear is not very efficient. We moved on." Voice of Dominion's next statement was simple. He said the Dominion would develop a new agent, one calibrated specifically for human biology. The Dominion did not accept failure as a permanent condition. It adapted and returned. Osmond did not flinch. She had been waiting for this. She placed a data chip on the table between them. She left her hand near it for a moment, and then moved her hand away, letting it sit there, small and flat and ordinary-looking. She said, "That chip contains our counterspore research. The full study, the mechanism of resistance, the bacterial strains involved, the chemical breakdown process at every stage. It also contains something else, a derived framework, based on our analysis of the spore's structure, that would allow any species with a sufficiently complex internal biome to be inoculated against spore variants. We developed it in 9 days. With more time, we can develop it further." She let that settle. Then she said, "If we share that framework freely with the Conclave, which we will, if we need to, then every world the Dominion might target becomes significantly harder to hollow. You spent 400 years building a perfect weapon. We are offering you the choice of whether it stays perfect or becomes history." The room was very quiet. Voice of Dominion looked at the chip. He did not pick it up. Soren, because he was Soren, added, "Also, separately, the protein folding mechanism has potential medical applications for neural regeneration in humans. So the weapon you built to destroy our minds may end up curing brain disease. I thought you should know that. Scientifically, it is remarkable." Dorvin put his head down on the table, just for a moment. Then he sat back up. Voice of Dominion said he needed to consult the Dominion High Council. He said it in the tone of someone who needed to leave the room immediately. Osmond said, "Of course. Take your time." The Vreth delegation left. Dorvin looked at Osmond across the table. He said, in careful English, "Was that intentional? All of it?" Osmond said. The science was Soren's. The chip was mine. The order we set it in. Yes, that was intentional. Dorvin was quiet for a moment. Then he said something he had not said about a client. Species in 11 years of diplomatic postings. He said, I think Earth is going to be fine. Osmond smiled. It was a small smile, a tired one, but real. We were always going to be fine, she said. We just needed them to understand that. The conclave received the meeting transcript at 17 light hours distance and spent 4 days arguing about it. This was not unusual. The conclave argued about most things. What was unusual was the quality of the argument. It had a different texture than normal conclave disputes, which tended to be dry and procedural. This one had something in it that some of the older representatives had not heard in chambers for a very long time. It had urgency. The Sulhuri delegation, led by a senior council member named Oral, pushed hardest. Oral had been in interstellar diplomacy for 30 years. He had watched species fall to the Vreth spore twice, once from a distance, once close enough that he could see the before and after in the same faces. He stood in chamber and said, with more heat than conclave, decorum usually allowed, that humanity had done in 9 days what the combined scientific community of the conclave had been unable to do in 4 centuries, and that any governing body that did not immediately open formal relations with Earth was making an error it would explain to its grandchildren. The Asari hegemony was less warm. Their representative, a careful and suspicious individual named Durith, pointed out that a species capable of reverse engineering the Vreth spore in under 2 weeks, accidentally, while under biological attack, was not a species that should be brought into conclave structures without careful evaluation. He did not use the word threat, but the word sat in his sentences like furniture he was trying not to bump into. The Dren Collective said very little in chambers. Outside chambers, they sent 3 separate research exchange requests directly to Earth's WHO division within the first 48 hours of reading Soren's paper. They did not wait for conclave approval. The Dren were, as a species, pragmatists about science. On Earth, Soren's full paper had been public for a week. It had been read, downloaded, translated, and discussed across 12 planetary networks in the conclave's outer systems. 2 junior researchers on a Sulhuri academic station had already begun a response paper proposing a theoretical extension of the framework to non-carbon biology. They sent Soren a message asking if he would be interested in co-authoring. He was asleep when it arrived. He replied 2 hours later. The reply said, yes, absolutely. When can we talk? And also contained a list of 12 questions he had been wanting to ask Sulhuri biologists for years. The Vreth Dominion was quiet. Too quiet, by their own standards. Voice of Dominion had returned to the command vessel after the meeting and submitted his report to the Dominion High Council. The report was factual and thorough. He did not editorialize. He did not need to. The facts were sufficiently extraordinary on their own. The High Council convened. The session lasted 6 days, 3 times longer than any spore-related council session in recorded Dominion history. What came out of it was not announced publicly, but the Vreth vessel in Earth orbit began, quietly, to move. Not aggressively. It simply repositioned to a higher orbit, then a higher one, and then crossed the threshold that, in conclave navigation law, indicated withdrawal from a planetary engagement zone. It did not fire anything. It did not send another message. It left. Dorvin watched it go from his station window. He took a long breath through his nose. Then he opened a channel to Admiral Osmond on the surface below and said, they are leaving. He paused. I did not fully expect that. Osmond's voice came back calm and level. I did. He believed her. Earth's application to the Galactic Conclave was filed the following week by Farid's diplomatic office, written in proper conclave formatting with all the correct annexes and supporting documentation. It was thorough in the way that applications from serious people are thorough, not padded, not performative, but complete. It cited Earth's scientific capacity, its population size, its existing communication infrastructure with conclave species, and its demonstrated ability to respond to galactic-scale threats. The last line of the application read, Earth does not request protected status. Earth Requests full membership, with research sharing rights and mutual defense standing. We believe we have demonstrated we have something to offer. We are prepared to discuss terms. Oral read it in his office and said, to no one in particular, well. Finally, the Asari filed a formal objection, which was expected. The objection cited insufficient observation period, unverified long-term stability, and 3 procedural technicalities that Farid's team had already addressed in the annexes. The conclave would work through it. These things took time, but the direction was clear. On Earth, most people were following the news in the distracted way people follow events that are large and strange and not fully real feeling yet. The governments had been careful about how much they shared, not dishonest, but measured. The public knew the alien ship had come. They knew it had left. They knew something had happened with a biological agent and that their scientists had handled it. They did not know, yet, how close it had been. Soren knew. Amara knew. Osman knew. A few hundred other people in classified positions knew. Most of them had developed a tendency to look at the sky for a moment before going inside at the end of the day. Not with fear exactly, more like the look a person gives a river after a flood has passed, acknowledging that the river is still there. A journalist managed to get an unofficial comment from a mid-level researcher in Soren's division, which ran in 3 publications under the headline, Scientists Say Alien Bioweapon was genuinely impressive before failing entirely. The conclave translation system flagged it. Oral read it and laughed, which was something his staff noted they had not seen him do in council-related matters for several years. The Dren sent their 3rd message to Soren's team on the same day. This one was not about the spore research. It was about a completely separate xenobiology problem they had been stuck on for 11 years and wondered, given recent evidence, if the humans might have thoughts on. Soren replied in 4 hours with a paper outline, a proposed methodology, and a respectful but very enthusiastic note suggesting they might want to rethink their base assumptions on molecular binding from the ground up. The Dren researcher who received it read it twice. Then she went and told her colleague that she thought humans were, and she was using the precise Dren scientific term here, alarming in the best possible way. The galaxy was paying attention now. It had not paid attention to Earth before. It would not make that mistake again. And somewhere in a Vreth Dominion archive, a report was being quietly filed, not deleted, not classified higher, just filed, under a category that had never been used. In 400 years of Dominion expansion, the category was labeled, in Vreth, engagement not recommended. It had 1 entry, 1 world, 1 species, Earth. 1 year later, Soren was late to his own presentation. He had been in the lab. He was always in the lab. Amara had come to find him at 20 minutes past the hour he was supposed to leave, still in his work clothes, staring at a protein map on his screen with the focused look of someone who has just noticed something and cannot decide if it is important. She physically removed the stylus from his hand and pointed at the door. He changed in 7 minutes and made the shuttle with 4 to spare. The Conclave Forum was held aboard a neutral station, a massive circular structure that served as a meeting point for 12 member species and, as of 3 months ago, Earth. The formal admission had passed after 6 weeks of procedural debate, 2 Asari objections, 1 Dren amendment that actually improved the language, and a final vote. That was, in the end, not close. Oral had called Farid when the result came through. The call was short. They were both too tired and too relieved for a long one. Earth had sent a small delegation for the forum. Osman was there, seated in the 2nd row, in a dark suit that she wore with the same energy she wore her uniform. Farid was beside her. Dorvin sat 1 row back, technically representing the Sulhuri mission, but functionally there as himself, in the way that people attend things personally when the official reason and the personal reason happened to point in the same direction. Soren stood at the front of the chamber and looked at the room. Representatives from 9 species, various shades of unfamiliar. An audience that, 1 year ago, had written Earth off without a second thought. He did not have notes. He never used notes. He said, a year ago, the Vreth Dominion tried to remove humanity's ability to think. I want to show you what we have been thinking about since then. He presented for 45 minutes. The full counter-spore framework came first. Completed now, refined by 6 months of additional work and 2 rounds of DRIN. Collaboration that had significantly expanded its cross-species applicability. The room was quiet in the way that rooms are quiet when people are paying very close attention. Then he moved to the second section, and the room got quieter still. The spore's protein folding mechanism, the same cascade the Vreth had designed to dismantle minds, had given Soren's team an unexpected window into neural biology that human science had not previously had access to. The mechanism moved through brain tissue in ways that no human-designed agent had ever attempted. Studying how it did that and why it failed in humans had opened questions about neural repair that were entirely new. New enough that 6 months ago, Soren had started a second project, a medical one. The protein folding principle, stripped of its destructive payload and redirected, could theoretically be used to reach damaged areas of the brain and support regeneration. Early models were promising. They were not ready for trials, but the foundation was solid. He said, "The weapon built to hollow our minds may teach us how to heal them. We do not know yet. We are going to find out." He thanked the room. He sat down. The DRIN researcher in the third row, the same one who had called humans alarming in the best possible way, started the applause and did not stop until several others joined. That evening, Earth held its own ceremony. Smaller, quieter, in a converted conference room in Geneva because no one had thought to book something larger. Osmond stood at the front of a room full of the people who had been awake for those first 9 days. Her defense staff, Soren's lab team, Farid's diplomatic office, and a few people from agencies whose names were not in any public document. She told them the truth, not the version that had been reported, which was accurate but incomplete. The real version, the margin, how narrow it had been, how the spore at its design potency should have worked, how the thing that saved them was not a weapon they built or a strategy they planned, but the accumulated biological accident of 10,000 years of human beings eating fermented vegetables and never once living in a sterile environment. She said, "We survive because our bodies are, microbiologically speaking, extremely complicated. We are full of things that should not work together and somehow do." The Vreth designed a weapon against a clean system. We have never had a clean system. We are, and I want this said clearly in front of everyone here, biologically chaotic in a way that saved our entire species. Someone in the back laughed. Then someone else did. Then the whole room was laughing. The tired, genuine kind. The kind that only happens when something was almost very bad. And then was not. Osmond waited for it to settle. Then she said, more quietly, "The galaxy did not expect us to be here. We are here. Whatever comes next, we face it as a member of something larger than ourselves, because we chose to share what we found instead of keeping it. That was the right call. I want you all to know I believe that." She raised a glass. The room raised theirs. Later, much later, Dorvin sat in the orbital station alone, the lights of Earth moving slowly below him through the viewport. He thought about the 14 worlds he had watched go silent in his career. He thought about the moment he had sent the message, telling the conclave to write Earth off. He thought about being wrong in a way that felt entirely different from the ordinary ways of being wrong. He opened his personal log and wrote one paragraph. He did not send it to anyone. "I have served in diplomatic postings for 22 years. I have watched species face the Vreth and lose. I thought I knew what losing looked like. I did not know what it looked like when a species refused to recognize it as an option. Humans did not defeat the Vreth through strength or strategy or luck alone. They defeated them by responding to catastrophe the way they seemed to respond to everything, with questions, with notebooks, with an apparently unshakable belief that any problem is interesting enough to be worth understanding. I do not know what to call that. I know it is real." He closed the log. In the lab below, the lights were still on. Soren was there, as he almost always was, working on the neural regeneration models. The new file was open on his screen. He had named it months ago and not changed the name since, even when colleagues asked if he was serious. He was serious. The file was called Wonderful Gift. He picked up his stylus. He started writing. Outside the window of the lab, the city was mostly asleep, and above the city the stars were clear, and somewhere among them the galaxy was paying attention for the first time. It had sent its worst against this small, loud, complicated world. The world had said thank you for the research material, filed the incident, and gotten back to work.